I think Toon Woman has opinions. Anyway, hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to RoahmMythril 3, and it's time for the judge commentary on the last stage we just played, 129th place, Bakery Man by Darko Hexar and Nintendo. This stage got a 43.6, with a 4.6 in difficulty, 11 in design, 4.4 in fun, 9 in creativity, 10.2 in aesthetics, and 9 in functionality. Mick. Oh man, I really wanted to like this level. There's so much love poured into the concept and everything just feels so lively here. It has some really fun concepts too. The cake and pie platforms lend themselves to a lot of scenarios, and both Sweets Alley and Bread and Butter add awesome twists to the previously introduced concepts. Combine that with some fun, challenging mid-bosses, and a slightly modified Pharaoh Man for the Bakery Man fight, and this level would be pretty alright. If it stopped there. Unfortunately, this has a severe case of no idea left behind, which in practice doesn't work for one level. Rather than end at the Robot Master, Bakery Man drops you into the basement and delivers a stage twice as long as necessary, complete with a metric ton of new assets plus an extra element. There's still moments to praise here. The bouncy cakes are a fun new idea in a vacuum, the moving coats in Suits Alley make excellent coverage for obstacles, and the sheer amount of value Bread and Knives gets from the scrolling respawn is great. However, on top of everything else, the basement section is too much, especially the second element. If you're going to have two elements in your stage, split earlier, not later. Later is a good way to make us dislike a level. This would still be salvageable by itself. There's a ton of clever design, checkpoints are abundant, and the charm is high enough that it wouldn't get totally boring. Unfortunately, the level's idea of fair punishment seems to be copious amounts of death. As such, the difficulty ramps up unreasonably fast, especially considering most of the utilities, aka the designer's safety nets for difficulty, are disabled. Even the aesthetic works against things. The brown outlining on the floors looks solid, which leads to an alarming amount of tripping into pits, and the spikes can be hard to see sometimes. High difficulty combined with unreasonable length is enough to drain basically all the fun from the level, and what remains is an absolute slog. When my primary solution for a part of the level is to take advantage of the new suit's slime, activating iframes to cheese my way past it all, there's a problem. It's a shame because there's plenty of brilliant ideas buried in here. Unfortunately, the level just didn't know when to stop, and the end result leaves a spoiled, moldy taste. If you're willing to beat and thrash at mastering the place, there is still a fun level to be found, but otherwise, oh boy, I'd be dropping the difficulty a couple notches before doing anything else with this. Shinriu. Deep down, this is a stage with a ton of potential. The overall idea and theming is definitely there, but sadly, things start to fall apart when it comes to the actual level design. For one, the platforming here is way too punishing. Throughout nearly every segment of this stage, making even the tiniest mistake will often net you an instant death. The timing and precision needed to get the third and fourth tokens without dying is a prime example of this. There's not so much a difficulty curve here as there is a difficulty wall that rarely lets up. Granted, there are a few sections that manage to set themselves apart, even with some tight jumps involved. For instance, the Bread and Knives path in the second half of the stage has a very strong emphasis on enemy and gimmick synergy. It gets taken a step further when you're forced to fight the same enemy, but at different angles as you go through some of the room layouts. Unfortunately, for as enjoyable as moments like that are, they're very few and far between in a stage that's already pushing it in terms of length. This level wouldn't be nearly as frustrating if it had ended after the first Bakery Man fight. Instead, it ends up being a slog to play through to full completion, on account of the 4 split paths and 2 energy elements. It's unfortunate considering there's obviously a lot of effort put into the visuals here. The redesigns of vanilla assets are all really charming and fun to look at, especially the donut Escaroo. Although I do question the sudden theme shift from baked goods to suits and business attire in one of the later halves of the level. Maybe there's a connection I'm not understanding here, but it definitely struck me as odd. That nitpick aside, the only other aesthetic-related thing I had a problem with was the spikes. Again, maybe it's just me, but I routinely smacked into them by accident on my first playthrough, as I didn't notice them until it was too late. I didn't have this issue on subsequent runs, and this was way after my first time playing the level, so I'm fully willing to admit that this was probably just a me problem at the time. Either way, I left this stage feeling a bit on the disappointed side. Like I said, there's a good level concept in here, but it's marred by overwhelming platforming segments, along with being too lengthy. I'm sure this would turn out great with a bit more polish, though. Patchy. Don't be fooled by the sweetness. This level has a cute aesthetic, and that is the only good thing I can say about this level. In fact, I think the aesthetics kinda hinder the level design quite a bit, with so many animated elements that they can be very distracting, while also sacrificing immediate readability because the elements no longer look like their original counterparts. The falling and rising Concrete Man platforms are the biggest offenders in this regard. The spikes also look a lot more like stage decorations than something dangerous. Of all the elements, spikes are the last thing you want to design the appearance to be more soft-looking. There are also multiple split paths, each containing its own set of enemies and gimmicks to deal with. It really made the stage feel unfocused, with not much breathing room for the players to adapt to the constantly changing environment. Another big flaw of this stage is everything is very unforgiving. Most sections are filled with instant death via pits, spikes, or platforms crushing you. To make matters worse, there's a very timing-precise jump you have to do each time you respawn in one part, making each reattempt feel tedious. Finally, that spike trap. You know what I'm talking about. Hidden away with minimal warning at the end of a tough section. No, I don't care that there is a hint at the bottom, which, mind you, I didn't even notice during my playthrough. I used Ice Wall to find my way instead. The problem is that there was no indication beforehand that you'd completely hide away anything in the coats, since up to this point, there was always at least some part of the obstructed item poking out, and the trap was put literally just before the boss corridor, after a really mean section that requires a few near-perfect timing jumps. That is just incredibly bad design. There's no sugarcoating this one. And then the bosses are just powered-up versions of their original engine counterparts, with extra attacks and arenas that actively hinder you. They all do brutal damage, so it's a perfect gatekeeper for any exhausted players who made it this far after playing through those atrocious sections. It is an extremely unfun stage. Flashman 85. Recipe for Bakery Man. I feel like I'm about to watch a B. Dylan Hollis video. A Bakery Man from 1975. In a 20x9 grid, assemble 75 screens, about 2.5 levels, into a comfortable alternating pattern of linear and divided paths, with checkpoints at regular intervals. Decorate with fun, colorful graphics and helpful signage. Blend spikes into the background so they're hard to notice. Optionally, outline solid objects with a border that interferes with the player's ability to judge distances when jumping. Let your creativity run wild and redesign as many dev kit assets as possible to fit the theme. Toasters, cake frosting, rolling pins, croissants, secret cupcakes, and a donut snail are especially delightful. If your confection begins to look like a power plant or laundromat, it's time to stop. Roll out a focused challenge arc for each area. Shape the learning curve to appear inviting to newcomers, then smear it around with new concepts and combinations that demand immediate adaptation. Some options include a confusingly rapid succession of cakes and pies, a cumbersome chocolate fountain that looks like background decoration, and being unexpectedly impaled on a suit jacket. A light sprinkling of precise challenges is optimal, but feel free to dump an entire container if you're only making this for yourself. Note that large amounts of instant death should be offset by Rush Bike and Rush Jet, otherwise a skip teleporter may form. To finish, add peppy music. One main tune is fine, but changing to a second tune after a fake ending would add more flavor. Garnish with charmingly quirky humor. Serve immediately without getting other people to taste it first. Tasters always complain about excessive load times, unsafe screen transitions, inconsistently labeled bottomless pits, boss projectiles that don't disappear with the boss, and pie that disappears if you leave the screen and come back. Makes 2 servings, but you'll probably only want 1. And Ace Spark. After my first playthrough getting the element on the upper path, for a while on my comment document, the notes for this stage, the notes that get expanded to full comments, were simply 3 choice words. Blank this level. Replace the word blank with whatever comes to mind after playing this level, and I'm sure you'll find it. Even the positives here are outweighed by negatives attached to what I actually did like here. The theme is cute. All the rethemed enemies are cute. This level should be really adorable, and the aesthetic should be a hit. But at a certain point, everything blends in together, and I find I can't tell what is and isn't a spike. The differences between enemy and gimmick variants is way too subtle to tell them apart, as you're being pelted by cake or whatever the fudge that final upper path is throwing at you. Spikes are really hard to see. The background has detailing that tricks the eye into what is and isn't solid ground, and the flashing neon graphics designed to paper over what a visual mess it is to navigate just blend in and become hard to notice. Also, did I mention spikes? Spikes should really stick out more to not go round the reckon? Assuming that's something to add to the British slang dictionary. Not familiar with that one. I like how this stage looks, and even that part has severe problems. I had more or less given up on this stage getting a good score as I lost a lot of goodwill by the end of the approach to Bakery Man himself. But I figured, no, okay, this just has one absurdly hard couple of rooms that are too tight and pixel perfect for its own good, I think the rest of the level held up okay, even if it did get a tad difficult. Bakery Man was an okay rehash of Pharaoh. And then the level continued. And it's all the same. Yes, the gimmicks are different, but at its core, the stage is all the same every path. Jumps are tight, combined with hitbox dissonance and visual clutter. Enemies constantly pelting you from off-screen as you try to navigate around moving solid platforms, then inexplicably crush you despite very much not looking so. Checkpoints that are so instant death heavy that the short length between them takes a lot longer to navigate back to the instant death hazard you died at. Enemies that are normally used sparingly due to damage output end up splattered about the place, not that the health bar is even relevant in this level given the sheer one-hit death nature of it all. This all applies to every path. I normally replay these stages a fair bit, making sure I catch everything I need to say. I could give this entire comment the Yggdrasil treatment if I really wanted to, but let's be honest here, its issues keep cropping up repeatedly, just in new and subtle ways. Yeah, I ain't replaying this again. Both elements once were enough. So, overall, there are some points that the judges brought up, but there are also some that I honestly disagree with. Legit, I did overall have fun with this stage, even though some of it was difficult. There are some parts I do disagree with, though. And we'll get to those. One thing that I definitely do agree with that I think every single judge brought up was the spikes were way too subtle. Their colors were kind of muted to a point that it felt like they faded into the background. And so, like, that first time I got killed on a spike, I seriously didn't even notice that's what I hit. Even knowing what to look for, I feel like sometimes I had a hard time spotting them, especially if it was just like one spike sitting there by itself. It was easy to miss. And the thing is, there were some times that the devs, I think, tried to make the spikes stand out a bit more, but even then, I'm not sure I agree with the way they did it. Because they did so by putting those thick brown wall borders around them, which made it look more like that should have been a solid platform with decorations on it than just walls that don't count and death spikes. I think that got me a couple of times, and it especially affected me when trying to dodge some of those spikes that were thus bordered while on a conveyor belt, because it made me misjudge when I needed to slide. All the borders did really was, once I saw them as the spikes they were, it made it feel like they had a bigger hitbox than they really did, so I was trying to adjust slide timing for avoiding the borders as well, and that usually meant that I was sliding too early, and thus standing up too early and getting spiked to death. Honestly, the spikes need to be more vivid, more clearly outlined so that they look like part of the foreground and not part of the background. That is a main point there where I will agree with the judges. The other thing I will say is, I do admittedly feel like the second half wasn't really necessary. Though I will at least say that of the 4 sections, 3 of them fit the theme well enough. Sweet Sally, Bread and Butter, and Bread and Knives, that all works. It's all culinary themed. The first 2 obviously more clearly, it sticks with the bakery theme very solidly, but Bread and Knives still works. Chef knives, they're very much a part of the culinary arts, so it still works. And then you have a laundromat, which just feels strange. I get that at the end of the day, it's just a play on words, because both the secondary split paths are kind of a shifting around of the names of the first 2 split paths. So you had Sweet Sally, then you have Suit Sally. So it sounds a bit like it, but with a twist. However, I don't think it really added much as far as the gameplay. It just kind of added a simple play on words. And as much as I do love puns, my friends suffer for that, I don't really feel like it was necessary for the stage. It kind of muddied the identity of the stage a little bit. And while I loved the visual theming of this stage. Like, going back to that thing with the Magnum Man stage where Ace was talking about using that as a test stage to see if a potential judge would be too favorable toward custom graphics, if they'd be too lenient because of that. I admit I probably would fall on that side in many cases. I think there is a limit that I would hit, but I do admittedly tend to give points for that level of effort and creativity. and I definitely would have here. I love the theming, I loved how the enemies look, and even though it doesn't really fit in with the stage, I love how creative the enemy designs and reskins were for the Suits Alley part. They definitely fit with the theming there. They just really feel like they were from a different stage. And so that's where I definitely get what Mick was saying about no idea left behind. Like, everything fits until you get to the basement, and even then you're immediately presented with exploding batteries that really don't feel like they belong in a bakery, so it starts feeling weird even at that point. And then you have the double split path, which again, Bread and Knives works, Suits Alley not as much. And also, Suits Alley, I do have to point out that that death did feel cheap. Because there is nothing warning you up to that point that they're going to pull something like that. And the fact that you just get through kind of a rough section, into the boss hallway, the boss gate's right there, you're programmed to just run for it, and boom, you die on something you can't even see. And then you have to go back a ways. I feel like if there had been a checkpoint in that hallway, and that invisible death there was just kind of a troll moment, I honestly would have had a good laugh at that point. It would have been a, haha, okay, you got me. But having to redo the segment before it again to get back there and see, okay, what did I miss here? That didn't really feel so good. But definitely to end on a positive, I overall did have a good time with this stage. I loved how creative it was. The graphics were really nice. All the reskins were really nice. I did really like the donut snail. That looked awesome. And overall, I think it was a good time. It is one that I think could have benefited more from being a bit shorter. Like, if instead of a second half, you either just kept the first half and ended it at Bakerman, or if you made it so there wasn't a split path and the second half was just whichever path wasn't in the first half, so that you kept the overall theming more simple. I think that could have worked too. It is one of those things where I am kind of curious how much having two designers influenced things here. Like if it was a case of two designers having two very different ideas and just trying to shove in whatever could be fit into the stage. I wonder if that played a part here or not. But either way, I applaud the creativity, and as far as skip teleporter stages go, I honestly had a good time with this one. Skip teleporters always give me a feeling of dread when I first see them, but honestly, I had a good time here overall. There were some rough spots, but overall, a good time was had. Would play again, honestly. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series and having a good time, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, opinions!